What kind of person smashes a stranger's truck window over a parking spot and expects to walk away unscathed? In the heart of Montpelier's bustling farmers' market, under a sky heavy with gray clouds, Karen stood, arms crossed, her face twisted into a sneer that could curdle milk. She was a storm in human form, loud, unyielding, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. The air buzzed with the chatter of vendors and the scent of fresh produce, but all eyes were on her and the shattered glass sparkling on the gravel beside Amos's old pickup truck. He was a farmer, weathered as the oak trees lining his fields, and he stood there, staring at the jagged hole in his rear window, his hands trembling not from fear but from a rage he'd never felt before. Amos had arrived at the market before dawn, as he did every Saturday, his truck loaded with crates of tomatoes, zucchini, and jars of honey from his small farm just outside town. He'd parked in his usual spot, a patch of gravel near the market's entrance, where he could unload easily. It was a routine etched into his bones after years of hauling his harvest to sell. But today, Karen had rolled into the lot in her gleaming SUV, late and fuming, her tires screeching as she swerved toward the same spot. She'd leaned out her window, shouting that he'd stolen her space, that she always parked there, though Amos had never seen her face before. He'd shrugged, calm as ever, and said, "Ma'am, I was here first. Plenty of spots over there." That's when her eyes narrowed, and something snapped. She'd grabbed a tire iron from her trunk, her movements jerky, her voice a venomous hiss about disrespect and entitlement. Before Amos could process it, she'd swung, and the crack of glass echoed like a gunshot across the market. Customers froze, vendors peeked from their stalls, and Amos's heart sank as he saw his truck his lifeline, his only way to haul his crops defaced. Karen didn't flinch. She tossed the tire iron back into her SUV and spat, "Maybe next time you'll think twice." Amos, his voice low but steady, said only one thing, "You'll regret that." The market was alive with whispers now, but Karen didn't care. She strutted toward the stalls, her chin high, as if she'd won some unspoken war. Amos, though, wasn't one to let things slide. He'd grown up on land that demanded resilience, where every broken tool or ruined crop was a lesson in fighting back. He pulled out his phone, snapped photos of the damage, and called the police. Within minutes, an officer arrived, her badge glinting under the overcast sky. Karen's confidence wavered as the officer approached, her questions sharp and unyielding. "Ma'am, did you break this man's window?" Karen scoffed, claiming it was an accident, that Amos had provoked her, that she was the real victim here. But the crowd had seen it all, and their murmurs told a different story. Amos stood by his truck, his weathered hands clenched, watching as Karen spun her tale. He wasn't just fighting for his truck, was fighting for the principle of it. His farm was his life, built on years of sweat and sacrifice. That truck wasn't just metal and glass. It was his father's before him, a relic of harvests past, carrying the weight of his family's legacy. Karen's act wasn't just vandalism. It was an assault on everything he'd worked for. The officer took statements, her pen moving swiftly across her notepad, and Amos felt a flicker of hope. Maybe justice wasn't a lost cause. But then came the twist, a moment that turned his stomach. As the officer questioned a vendor nearby, the man hesitated, his eyes darting to Karen. Amos caught a subtle nod from her, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his blood run cold. The vendor, a wiry man who sold homemade jams, mumbled that he hadn't seen much, that maybe the glass was already cracked. Amos's jaw tightened. He knew that vendor. They'd swapped stories over coffee for years. Why was he lying? Had Karen gotten to him? The thought gnawed at Amos, planting a seed of doubt. Was the market, his community, turning against him? Karen's smirk grew as she sensed the shift. She leaned toward the officer, her voice dripping with false sincerity, claiming she'd only tapped the window, that it must have been faulty. Amos felt the ground tilt beneath him, but he held firm. He had photos, witnesses, and the truth. He wasn't about to let her rewrite reality. As the officer wrapped up, she handed Amos a card and said, "File a report. This'll go to court." Karen's eyes widened, just for a second, before her mask of defiance snapped back into place. Amos nodded, his resolve hardening. This wasn't over. He drove home that evening, the wind whistling through the broken window, a constant reminder of the fight ahead. His wife, Lila, met him at the door, her face creasing with worry as he told her what happened. "She thinks she's untouchable," he said, his voice rough. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes fierce. "Then show her she's not." Amos spent the night poring over his photos, writing down every detail, preparing for what was coming. He wasn't just fighting Karen. He was fighting the kind of arrogance that trampled over people like him, people who worked the earth and lived by honesty. The next morning, Amos filed a formal complaint at the courthouse, a small brick building in the heart of Montpelier. The clerk, a kind woman with glasses perched on her nose, listened as he explained the damage, the cost, the insult of it all. She nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard, and handed him a court date. "You've got a strong case," she said softly. Amos felt a spark of hope, but he knew Karen wouldn't go down quietly. She'd fight dirty, twist the truth, maybe even rally others to her side. He'd seen that nod at the market, that flicker of betrayal. But he wasn't backing down. This was about more than a window. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could break whatever they wanted and walk away. As the court date loomed, Amos prepared meticulously, gathering receipts for the truck's repairs, statements from witnesses who'd agreed to speak up, and even a grainy security video from a nearby stall that showed Karen's swing. He wasn't a man of many words, but he'd learned to fight for what was right, whether it was his crops against a drought or his dignity against a bully. Karen, meanwhile, was spinning her own web, posting on social media about unfair treatment and small-town bias, painting herself as the victim. The market buzzed with her narrative, and Amos felt the weight of eyes on him every Saturday. Some nodded in support, others looked away. He didn't care. He'd see this through no matter what it took. The days leading to the court date were a storm of whispers and tension. Amos kept to his routine, rising at dawn to tend his fields, but the weight of the upcoming trial clung to him like damp soil. He'd catch glimpses of Karen at the market, her voice carrying over the crowd as she complained loudly to anyone who'd listen. Her words laced with venom about that farmer who dared to challenge her. She'd rallied a small group of supporters, people who didn't know Amos or the truth, drawn in by her theatrics. It stung, but Amos kept his head down, his hands busy with his crops, his mind on the fight ahead. The twist from the market still haunted him. That vendor, Tom, who'd lied about not seeing the incident, avoided Amos's gaze now. Amos had learned through a friend that Karen had promised Tom a catering gig for her next big event, a bribe to keep his mouth shut. It was a punch to the gut, but it also lit a fire in Amos. If Karen thought she could buy her way out of this, she was wrong. He doubled down, tracking down another witness, a young woman who'd been buying apples nearby. Her name was Sarah, and she'd seen everything: Karen's swing, her sneer, the whole ugly scene. Sarah's voice shook as she agreed to testify, but her eyes were steady. "I don't like bullies," she said. Amos felt a flicker of gratitude, a reminder that not everyone could be swayed. The courtroom was small, its wooden benches worn smooth by years of disputes. Amos sat in a stiff suit, his calloused hands folded, feeling out of place among the polished tables and legal jargon. Karen swept in, her heels clicking, her face a mask of indignation. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair pulled tight, every inch of her screaming defiance. Her lawyer, a slick man with a sharp smile, whispered in her ear as they took their seats. Amos's lawyer, a local named Clara who'd grown up on a farm herself, gave him a reassuring nod. "We've got this," she whispered. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair, called the room to order, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Clara presented the case with precision. The photos of the shattered window, the repair estimate of $800, the security footage showing Karen's deliberate swing. Sarah took the stand, her voice clear despite her nerves, describing how Karen had screamed at Amos before grabbing the tire iron. The crowd at the market had gasped. She said, and Karen hadn't even blinked as the glass shattered. Amos watched the judge's face, searching for a sign of where this was going. Karen's lawyer countered, claiming the footage was grainy, the damage exaggerated, and that Amos had provoked Karen by stealing her spot. He called Tom to the stand, and Amos's heart sank as the vendor repeated his lie, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't see much," Tom mumbled. "The window might have already been cracked." The room felt hotter, the air heavier as Karen took the stand. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sincerity, claiming she'd only tapped the window in frustration, that Amos had been aggressive, that she was a victim of his small-town grudge. Her words were smooth, practiced, but Amos saw the judge's eyes narrow. Then came the twist that shifted everything. Clara called a surprise witness, a teenage boy who'd been filming the market for a school project. His video, crystal clear, showed Karen's full swing, her face contorted with rage, and her triumphant smirk afterward. The courtroom buzzed, and Karen's composure cracked, her hands gripping the stand. The boy, nervous but resolute, confirmed he'd uploaded the video to a local forum, where it had spread like wildfire. Amos felt a surge of hope, but Karen's lawyer wasn't done. He grilled the boy, questioning his motives, suggesting the video was edited. The boy held firm, his voice steady, and Amos saw a spark of pride in his eyes. The judge called for order, her gavel sharp, and Amos felt the tide turning. Clara's closing argument was a masterpiece, painting Karen as a bully who thought her tantrum was above the law, while Amos was a man defending his livelihood. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it back, but his words felt hollow, drowned out by the truth of the video. As the judge deliberated, Amos sat quietly, his mind drifting to his farm, the rows of tomatoes, the hum of bees, the life he'd built. He didn't want revenge. He wanted justice, a line drawn against people like Karen who thought they could trample others without consequence. Karen, meanwhile, whispered furiously to her lawyer, her face flushed, her confidence unraveling. The courtroom held its breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Amos glanced at Sarah, who gave him a small nod, and he felt a quiet strength. Whatever happened, he'd fought for what was right. The judge returned, her face unreadable, and began to speak. Amos's heart pounded, but he kept his eyes forward, ready for whatever came next. Karen's smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of fear. The truth was out, and it was sharp as broken glass. The judge's voice was steady, cutting through the courtroom's tension like a plow through soil. Based on the evidence, including the clear video footage and credible witness testimony, I find the defendant, Karen Mitchell, liable for the damages to Mr. Amos Carter's vehicle. Amos exhaled, his shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. The judge continued, ordering Karen to pay $800 for the truck's repair, plus court fees and an additional $500 for emotional distress, citing her reckless and malicious behavior. Karen's face twisted, her lips parting in a silent gasp, as if the world had betrayed her. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off, her eyes blazing with defiance even now. The gavel fell, and the courtroom stirred, whispers rippling through the small crowd. Amos felt no triumph, only a quiet relief, like the calm after a storm. He'd stood his ground, not just for himself but for every person who'd ever been steamrolled by someone like Karen. As he stepped outside, the cool Montpelier air hit his face, and Clara clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, Amos," she said. He nodded, his throat tight, and glanced back at the courthouse where Karen was still arguing with her lawyer, her voice carrying through the open door. She hadn't learned a thing. But the fallout didn't end there. The video of Karen's tantrum had spread beyond the local forum, picked up by a regional news outlet. By the next morning, it was viral, shared across social media with hashtags like Montpelier Meltdown and Karen Gets Served. Comments poured in, most cheering Amos, others mocking Karen's arrogance. She tried to fight back, posting rants about fake news and biased courts, but they only fueled the fire. Her catering business, once a source of her pride, took a hit as clients canceled, unwilling to associate with her toxicity. Tom, The vendor who'd lied for her faced his own reckoning. Market regulars shunned his stall, and he issued a public apology, admitting Karen had pressured him. Amos didn't gloat. He just kept selling his tomatoes, his honey, his zucchini, his quiet dignity drawing customers back. Karen's world crumbled further when a second lawsuit emerged. Sarah, the witness who'd stood by Amos, filed a claim against Karen for harassment. Apparently, Karen had sent her threatening messages after learning she'd testify, accusing her of ruining her life. The messages were vicious, dripping with the same entitlement that had shattered Amos's window. Sarah, emboldened by the trial's outcome, wasn't backing down. Amos heard about it through Lila, who followed the local gossip. "She's her own worst enemy," Lila said, shaking her head. Amos agreed, but he felt a pang of pity. Karen's rage had built her a cage, and now she was trapped in it. Weeks later, Amos stood at his market stall, the repaired truck parked nearby, its new window gleaming. The market felt lighter now, the air free of Karen's shadow. She hadn't shown up since the trial, and rumors swirled that she'd left Montpelier altogether, unable to face the community's judgment. Amos didn't care where she went. He'd never wanted her destroyed, only held accountable. He handed a jar of honey to a customer, a regular who'd been at the market that day. "You showed her, Amos," the man said with a grin. Amos just smiled, his weathered face softening. "Wasn't about showing her," he said. "Was about doing right." That night, as he sat with Lila on their porch, the stars bright above their fields, Amos felt a peace he hadn't known in months. The fight had been hard, the betrayal of Tom a bitter pill, but it had reminded him of something vital. Truth had weight, and it could hold firm against even the loudest lies. He thought of Sarah, of the boy with the video, of the judge's steady voice. They'd all played a part, not just in his victory, but in something bigger, a reminder that no one, no matter how loud or entitled, was above consequence. Amos leaned back, his hand finding Lila's. "Think she'll ever learn?" he asked, his voice soft. Lila chuckled, her eyes on the horizon. "Some folks never do. But you showed him how it's done." Amos nodded, the weight of the fight lifting fully now. He'd stood up, not just for his truck or his farm, but for the quiet strength of those who work hard, live honestly, and refuse to be broken. The market would hum again tomorrow, and Amos would be there, his crates full, his heart steady, ready for whatever came next.